people before storing it would remove the starch, in other words, wash it in boiling water, so maybe they got it stuffed, and then they sent it to Barker to restart, and they might have asked Barker, likely, that because it is an antique, and they want to sell it, not to put their modern, like, laundry stamp. But had it been put through the laundry prior before, it will in all likelihood have stayed, because these inks, they take ages to go away. They have to be washed in boiling water again and again. So by the time they go away, the cloth is dead through so much boiling. So likely that color, having arrived at that process by the process of elimination, there are two possibilities. Either it would have been sent, like I'm certain this is the not the original starch, because this is what the seller told me. But I'm now discussing why there are no markings inside, because clearly had it been restarched in a laundry bag, then there would have been markings inside, like on that one. But there are none, so there are two possibilities. Possibility number one, it had never been restarched in a laundry at least, and they did it at home. Or, less likely, but still, they in the past asked the laundry not to put any markings, for the reason that often when it started getting worn, or even with a color like that, because it is only 3 plies, if at that time it was not accustomed to starch them as thick as that, or if you only had, it could be, once dirty, let's say after a week max, it would be really looking dirty, they could sort of swap it around. So if it's color band underneath, if you had a high, some people had a high, almost like a column, it's like the color band of the shed was in itself a color almost. So then or the undershed below the shed, you would attach that to a collar, and then sometimes the undershed actually had a collar, so it would protect, so the undershed collar would get all the sweat mostly, so that would mostly be clean, maybe only at the top it would be a bit dirty. So then instead of sending it to the laundry after a week, they might just reverse it and wet it again. But then that would mean, and likewise, sometimes this side got more worn out because the coat collar, usually made out of wood, would rub against it and damage the fibers, and also the neck cloth might damage it also. So then, in that case, even once washed, they would reverse it, because this maybe was like there were rips in it in the more, or maybe there were even no rips at all in the inside, so they would reverse it. We call it turn it around, because clearly you can't turn a color around like that. They would turn it around, and so if every time you had put it through the laundry, all that to say that if every time you had put it through the laundry it had been stamped like here, then turning it around, it will show the stamp. So he might, second possibility, he might have asked the laundry not to put a stamp. Why I think this is unlikely? Because then they will not find them, and also especially a lot of colors, one I had found in that box, which is not there anymore, which had clearly been restarched, had been turned around, and there was still the laundry mark on the other side, because without the laundry mark they would lose your color, because they all look the same, and they had so many colors to do back then, unlike today at Barker's they don't do that much in a single day. So they would lose your color, all of that for what? Not to have a laundry stamp, but who cares, because in all likelihood they always had especially the class of people wearing those colors, they will always have their coat on in public. So not only the waistcoat, but the coat on, and the coat also has a thick collar that covers that, plus they have the band in case of a band of a not turned collar like that, but an actual standing collar like a wing or an imperial collar. They would also have the neck band of the neck cloth, whether it be a bow tie or cravat or whatever. So it would cover the little, laundry stamp. So in all likelihood, if it has no laundry stamp, because clearly that collar has been worn in the day, because it looks worn out. Also, there was a rip actually there, and I put a small bit of plaster, like tape. Those tapes that are meant like as plasters, that they have like, it looks like a cotton cloth. Actually, this was a great repair, it barely shows. But anyhow, because the collar there because it is clearly worn out, it must have been washed at least and probably starched, but at home, and thus no laundry stamps, which makes it even harder to date. Because if the laundry stamp looked very modern now, you know, or looked very old or whatever, so, but in all likelihood, because of its construction and style and the fact it has clearly been worn, this is most likely very old, most likely older than this. This is, so there's some people who tell you this is like post 1920. I disagree, this could be much older, because in fact they had that style. The style itself only, forget the fact it's 3 plies, but they had that style in 2 plies, or in 3 plies if fake to some extent like these. But I mean the cut and all and the height, just think about the cut and height. I think even back in the early or at least mid 1870s, even with the super long wings and all. Because often people say the old ones have smaller wings, this is true, but some of them had it like that. Especially in the 70s it was very popular. Some I think were even longer. Then the popularity sort of waned away in the 1880s and throughout the 1890s, and then it's sort of, I think, I'm not certain because I'm not very interested by the 20th century, but I think it sort of gained popularity more or less slowly again throughout the early first decade of the 20th century. In other words, by 1910 a lot of them were short like that and had the long wings, because the long wings were not, I was only talking about the long wings actually. But by 1910, 1905, 1910 max, these were popular again, I guess. Whether for the day or the evening, especially for the day. But usually true, I think, at least prior to 1910 they would be usually higher than these. By 1910 they had a lot like that, but most were not like that. Most would have been like these two. But then you also had a lot of short ones. You had short ones before even, but by also what happened was that by 1910 the working class has much more economical means, and thus they want to, and also have a better education, so they want to elevate themselves and so they are more often wearing a collar, and rather than just a band collar on their shirt and only wear a detachable collar on the days off, if even they wear it then. And usually because they wanted it to be neat, but they wanted it to be easily washable and all. Usually it would be like celluloid or paper, so it obviously had to be removable, and even if it was cloth, it was also easier to wash it with a cloth collar. But usually for the working class, almost every time, by 90 to 99% of chances. But all that to say that more working class, or in other words common men, were wearing detachable collars, or simply even a collar on their shirts. But because they were still more or less working physically and were less used to constricting clothing, they more often had, these are all my theories, but I'm sure this is correct, because I based them on original films I saw, or especially photographs and even ads. They usually favored shorter collars, even very short ones like this. And there were even very short ones like as short as that, but in a wing variety. And so if those were to be found today, except if there were to be an other indication like a date on it or a box or whatever, otherwise, because most collars were also 3 plies and had always remained 3 plies, in such a case one would believe that collar be from after 1920. In other words, when almost all wing collars were very short, especially if as short as that, but in fact it could be from the early 1900s, it could even be from before, at least the 1890s. But from the early 1900s, at least by 1905-10, a lot even of wing collars were short. But I guess that because usually they targeted more the common man, in other words working class, but not middle class, or at least not upper middle class, and especially not upper classes, these collars would have been celluloid or linen or rubber or pure paper, and not a cloth. So obviously, again, most of them would not have survived. But also take into account most things, whether cloth or fake, have not survived prior to 1920. I explained that in the Gangs of New York playlist. I forgot which part. I think it was part 10 or like 13. I explained why things prior to 1920 usually have not even physically survived. So I'm not going to do it again. And